Tsubasa reincarnated as the weakest skeleton monster, but luckily, in this world, every time he defeated a monster, he grew stronger, and after accumulating enough strength, he could evolve into a higher-level creature. So, deep within the dungeon, after defeating countless skeletons and slimes, he finally evolved into a ghoul. At first, Tsubasa thought he could quietly grow stronger in this rarely visited dungeon, but one day, he suddenly heard the sound of humans fighting. Judging from the combat style, it seemed like a newbie adventurer who was struggling even against the weakest skeletons, getting pushed back repeatedly. Tsubasa initially had no intention of revealing himself, but when the adventurer was forced into a corner with no way to retreat and the skeleton lunged at him, Tsubasa couldn't ignore it anymore. He grabbed a sword and charged in. After defeating the skeleton, he tried to speak to the adventurer, though his words were unclear and he underestimated how alert the blonde-haired adventurer would be around monsters. Instead of listening, the adventurer lifted his sword ready to fight again. Tsubasa had no choice but to toss away his weapon, raise both hands, and keep speaking to show he meant no harm. Finally, the blonde noticed that Tsubasa seemed to be trying to talk. After all, a ghoul's face lacked muscle, so without paying close attention, it just sounded like gibberish. After a difficult back and forth, the adventurer finally learned that Tsubasa had once been a human adventurer who mysteriously turned into this form after dying. Upon realizing Tsubasa wasn't his enemy, the blonde quickly relaxed. Then, cautiously, he asked Tsubasa if he would be allowed to leave, worried that Tsubasa might silence him to protect his secret. But Tsubasa assured him that he would never do such a thing. He just wanted help buying clothes. Surprised, the blonde listened as Tsubasa explained he wanted to go back to town and needed a robe to hide his appearance. Once the blonde understood, Tsubasa handed him some money he had saved and told him to keep the change after buying the clothes. The blonde took the money carefully, then said he came from a noble family of knights and promised to repay Tsubasa's kindness. With that, he left confidently, and Tsubasa watched him go with a thoughtful expression. After all, any normal adventurer seeing a weird ghoul like him would have reported it immediately. But after this short encounter, Tsubasa's instincts told him the blonde wasn't that kind of person. While waiting, Tsubasa didn't let his guard down. He hunted monsters near the dungeon entrance so he could act quickly if the blonde came back with others. But he wasn't too worried, since ever since becoming a ghoul, he realized his abilities far exceeded what he had as a human, and even if he was surrounded, he could easily escape. Fortunately, those worries were unnecessary. Before long, the blonde returned carrying a large bundle. Though he'd been saved by Tsubasa, he still instinctively feared the ghoul's body, unsure if this was still the same person. Tsubasa didn't mind, and calmly explained that ghouls didn't usually appear in upper dungeon areas. The blonde also noticed that Tsubasa's speech had improved. As it turned out, after learning he'd be returning to town, Tsubasa had spent the time practicing how to speak. Now, at least he sounded like a raspy-voiced human. Tsubasa then opened the bundle and examined the clothes. They were plain in color and fully covered his body, helping him blend in as a magician. After putting them on, his appearance even looked a bit cool, but his face was still a problem. Unexpectedly, the blonde had already considered that and had brought a mask. However, just as Tsubasa tried to put it on, something strange happened. Though the mask looked fine and had a suction grip, it wouldn't come off once worn. The blonde panicked, saying all the other clothes came from a guild-recommended store, but the mask had been bought from a roadside stall because he liked it and it was cheap. In hindsight, that did seem suspicious. Still, he swore the mask wasn't cursed, as he had touched it and nothing happened. That's when Tsubasa realized the curse only activates when worn. Ignoring the shocked expression of the blonde, Tsubasa pulled out a sacred artifact, something only holy priests could use, and tried to remove the curse. But even with the sacred item, he could only dispel part of the curse, not enough to remove the mask. Now, he'd have to save money and find a real priest for help. After that, Tsubasa and the blonde boarded a carriage to town, during which Tsubasa learned that the blonde had come from the royal capital, a place filled with powerful people. New adventurers like him struggled to find suitable quests there. Through this conversation, the blonde realized Tsubasa was actually a really good person, and his fear of him faded. Soon, they arrived at the town gate, but Tsubasa hesitated to enter. Too many people here knew him, and using his old adventurer ID might expose him. The blonde then suggested they use the side entrance, which was less crowded, but Tsubasa hesitated again. He was still a monster, and if caught, the blonde could lose his adventurer status. The blonde responded that Tsubasa had saved his life, and he was willing to face any consequences. Touched, Tsubasa finally agreed and followed him to the side gate. He thought his old adventurer ID would let him pass easily, but his strange outfit caught the guard's attention. The blonde quickly stepped forward to explain. The guard was told that Tsubasa got cursed while fighting monsters and had to buy a mask to cover his face, but unexpectedly ended up with a cursed one that no matter how hard they pulled, it wouldn't come off. Even the guards were asked to try removing it themselves, but despite all efforts, the mask didn't move at all, so they had no choice but to let him into the city. Once inside, the blonde asked what Tsubasa planned to do next, but before he could finish, a passing carriage momentarily blocked his view, and when he looked back, Tsubasa had vanished because he didn't want to drag the blonde down and hoped that once he looked more human, him, he could apologize to him properly. After disappearing, Tsubasa arrived at an old friend's home, knocked many times but got no response. So he quietly pushed open the door and entered, only to find Lulin fast asleep. When she saw him, she was shocked, since there had been rare cases where humans were turned into low-level undead by high-level monsters. But those victims lost all personality and even their human will and emotions, which made Tsubasa's case unheard of. Though others might be afraid of him, Lulin, being a scholar, was actually excited, since investigating an evolving monster was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and Tsubasa trusted her completely as an old friend. After agreeing to cooperate, the first thing Tsubasa asked her to do was help sell his magic stones. Then he went alone to buy a new weapon because his old one had worn out from training, and after getting a new blade, he immediately returned to the dungeon to level up. He hadn't expected to find a middle-aged man in deep trouble, unable to defeat even the weakest slime, clearly a newbie. Tsubasa casually sliced the slime without even looking at the man's thanks, turned and left, not wanting to be burdened or risk exposing himself, but the man stopped her, asking to team up. He had many debts, and became an adventurer out of desperation, thinking this dungeon was easy but couldn't even handle a slime, so he begged to join even just as a helper. Tsubasa, no saint, politely refused, but as she turned to leave, a bold idea struck her. She asked him to follow, leading him into a hidden part of the dungeon that stunned the man, who never expected a secret passage to exist here. Tsubasa didn't explain, but this was the place where she had first encountered the dragon and became undead, and now she wanted the man to scout ahead, as she had returned many times and found nothing, yet refused to believe there were no traps. And sure enough, the man found a gap between two rocks hiding a secret path, and without needing any prompting, his curiosity led him to explore alone, hoping for treasure to pay his debts. But after only a few steps, something happened and he vanished. Tsubasa immediately recognized the magical formation on the ground, unique to this dungeon, and usually either a trap or a rare opportunity. After weighing the risks, she chose to follow, unwilling to let the man steal a possible fortune. But when she arrived, all she found was the man unconscious on the floor and a giant ancient golem looming nearby. At first, she felt strange, like she was losing control, and a deep thirst for blood surged inside her, making the man who had asked to team up look like prey. She had considered devouring him, suspecting he could be a liar waiting to strike when she let her guard down. And though uncertain, she thought of testing him on the road before deciding his fate, boss chamber, and that unless she defeated the golem, she couldn't leave. Luckily, while this monster would have been dead against the golem, and after a few hits, she brought it down. Then, she turned to heal the unconscious man, not because she had to, but because she'd changed her mind, realizing he wasn't a bad guy and deciding to recruit him instead. To show goodwill, she even gave him the boss's magic stone, though the man was confused and hesitant. Tsubasa explained she was injured in a monster attack, making her appearance too scary to go to shops or guilds, and though skeptical, the man couldn't deny what he saw. Still, he felt guilty for gaining to the uncle's restaurant to eat for free anytime he wanted. It turned out the uncle had fallen into debt because of trying to rapidly expand his restaurant business, but now that he had money, growing the restaurant wouldn't be a problem anymore. And upon hearing this, the uncle couldn't hold back his tears and immediately declared Tsubasa his big brother. After the uncle left, Tsubasa turned around and looked toward a shadowy corner where another magic circle was hidden, but he knew this wasn't the right time to explore it. So he and the uncle went back to the uncle's house. After telling his wife everything, both of them were full of gratitude, but what they didn't know was that if they had known what was really going on, surprised him even more was that, though only half a day had passed, he suddenly felt the craving for blood getting even stronger, and when he laid hesitation, Lulin cast a magic spell, revealing that she wasn't just a scholar, but also a top-tier mage. When Tsubasa came back to his senses and saw Lulin standing there, guilt rushed in. He remembered everything that had just happened despite having lost his reason, so he quickly apologized and shared everything that had happened earlier. And after listening, Lulin immediately confirmed her suspicion. His ghoul instincts were awakening, an artifact to heal her, which left Lulin shocked. Back when Tsubasa was still human, he could never fully use sacred tools for healing, but Tsubasa's appearance had changed a lot too, like the mask on his face was now only half there. When Tsubasa checked himself, he was stunned to find his body had undergone a massive transformation compared to when he first evolved their own, and she wondered whether the mask could now be removed. And combined with the physical changes, she concluded he had evolved again, though Tsubasa was blood and flesh, and that he wasn't a ghoul anymore, but a corpse demon, a much higher grade creature than a ghoul. Stunned, Tsubasa listened as she explained that his evolution was heading in the direction of his deepest undead rather than a skeletal monster, which was extremely rare in historical evolution records. And the reason he didn't instantly become a vampire, a more powerful form, was similar to how adventurers' strength and conditions. From now on, future evolutions wouldn't just require defeating monsters, didn't even need to sleep. His abilities were clearly overpowered, and every monster he killed made him stronger without limit. But the one downside was that he couldn't resist the craving for human blood. Thankfully, his childhood friend came a monster. His dream hadn't changed. He still wanted to become a heroic class adventurer. Back when he was human, he had struggled to get past his rank despite all the hard work, But now, knowing he could evolve infinitely, everything was different. Of course, he couldn't use his old identity or he'd risk being exposed, so he chose a new name and registered as a new adventurer, starting from the lowest rank, Iron. His appearance was odd, but in the adventurer world, people hiding their identity wasn't strange, and after successfully registering, he returned to the dungeon, not to fight monsters this time, but to revisit the hidden area where he'd first turned into a monster. On the way now, Tsubasa had no intention of interacting with the beginners she passed by on her way and quickly reached her destination. After multiple visits, only one magic circle remained unexplored. She was already prepared for battle, but to her surprise, there were no monsters waiting inside, only a strange room that looked like it hadn't been visited for years. Tsubasa moved closer to investigate. A woman suddenly called out, asking what she was doing there, though the question felt rebel, which not only injured her in an instant, but also destroyed the cloak she used to hide her identity. As the concept, the woman reached out her hand and Tsubasa's vision suddenly blurred. When she came to, she was at the dungeon's exit and immediately returned to tell Lulin everything, who upon hearing it thought Tsubasa had been cursed. After all, strange things kept happening around her. However, their focus quickly shifted to the map, but when Lulin tried using it, nothing happened. Yet when the woman had told Tsubasa, the map could only display dungeons she had already explored and mapped herself. Curious, Tsubasa then asked Lulin to examine pierced by normal blades, which only deepened her clue. Tsubasa returned the next day to the same hidden area, only to find the entrance completely gone, and the map showed no space there anymore. Clearly, it was a way of saying she was not welcome back. Not minding it too much, Tsubasa moved on to her next goal and accepted a quest to eliminate a pig demon, which made the receptionist nervous because such monsters typically required adventurers of the same rank. To had her reasons. Living in Lulin's house made it too suspicious for an unknown man to be seen hanging around, which could damage Lulin's reputation. Now that she had fulfilled all the requirements for same-rank adventurers, it was time for the advancement exam, starting with a written test covering guild rules and monster material handling, essential knowledge for the rank, and only after passing it would they be allowed to take the field test. Fortunately, Tsubasa's experience as a 10-year veteran made the written part a breeze, but the real test was in the practical round, where adventurers had to form teams of 3 and complete a guild quest together. This time, Tsubasa was teamed up with 2 rookies, Raiz and Rolla. One was an artist and the other a magician, forming a decent balance with Tsubasa's own skills. After teams were formed, the guild gave each person a map of the Star Moon Labyrinth, and the next phase of the test required them to reach a designated location marked on the map before sunset, with no restrictions on how they got there. Whoever arrived first would receive greater rewards, meaning they would inevitably have to face off against other teams along the way. But before that, they still needed to prepare a map of the Star Moon Labyrinth. Tsubasa quickly realized that the map provided by the guild was actually a 15-year-old version, far too outdated to be reliable, and she immediately understood this was a deliberate trap set by the guild to test for carelessness, one of the greatest dangers for any adventurer. Even in a simple rank-level exam, the details couldn't be taken lightly. After that, they reached the first floor of the labyrinth, but just at the entrance, they were swarmed by a group of ancient monsters, thankfully low-level ones that didn't pose a real threat. But even so, the team noticed something off. It was impossible for such monsters to appear in groups on the first floor, suggesting they had been deliberately lured, with incense scattered on the ground as proof, and it seemed someone was already lying in wait ahead. Realizing they had been led into a trap and were about to face other adventurers in combat, both Raiz and Rolla were shocked. This wasn't supposed to be a battle between people, but Tsubasa remained calm and told them to prepare for combat while she took the lead. Sure enough, as soon as she rounded the corner, a bald brute was lying in ambush, but Tsubasa had anticipated this. Behind him were 2 more enemies, and Raiz quickly switched places with Tsubasa to become the front guard, while the archer and mage in the back were exposed like lambs to the slaughter. Tsubasa took them down in mere seconds. Only the bald frontliner remained, and although Raiz struggled, he held on long enough for Rolla to cast her magic, and though it was their first time teaming up, the 3 of them showed impressive coordination. Under Tsubasa's lead, the group soon reached the final point marked on their map, only to find another team had arrived as well. But strangely, Tsubasa let the other team enter first, not just to scout the situation inside, but also to test for any last traps set by the guild. Soon, screams echoed from within, and people came running out in panic. Tsubasa reminded everyone that avoiding a losing battle wasn't shameful, but Raiz, determined not to run, said that if he gave up now, he'd never be able to return or become a real adventurer. What shocked Tsubasa next was that, despite having changed her name and appearance, the woman inside recognized her as the missing adventurer Letfen. At first, she'd only suspected based on the surname, but after observing Tsubasa's combat style during the exam, she became certain. It all began when the 3 of them faced the final test set by the guild, a massive slime boss. Although defeating it wasn't mandatory, putting in the extra effort mattered. For Raiz and Rolla, it was a tough challenge, but with Tsubasa's support, it wasn't impossible. The slime's ability to divide made it resistant to physical attacks, which rendered Raiz's efforts ineffective. effective, and destroying the core was the only way to stop its regeneration. Rolla's magic was their only hope. Tsubasa rushed forward to buy her time, drawing attention with feint attacks, and soon Rolla's fire spell blasted the slime into goo. But Tsubasa quickly reminded them to destroy the core, as only then would the boss be truly defeated. This was the first time Raiz and Rolla had beaten a boss-level monster, and as they were collecting materials, a few latecomers tried to sneak in, only to trigger the guild's sleeping gas trap. It made sense. Just before the finish line was when adventurers let their guard down most. Rolla realized the guild had never actually said first come, first serve would pass. Everyone had just assumed that. Tsubasa had seen through it from the start, and his decision to take it slow had been a test for his teammates too. He wanted them to learn to think independently, the hallmark of a true adventurer. Finally, they received their same rank certifications, and after reporting back to the guild, they officially became full-rank adventurers. As Raiz and Rolla left with bright hopes, Tsubasa watched them like a proud senior watching juniors grow up. Just then, Shira approached and said she had something to ask, hinting that she had guessed Tsubasa's true identity. While it might sound absurd that a human could become a monster, it had really happened, and Tsubasa asked if she was still willing to help someone like her. Though she didn't plan to harm anyone, others might never see her as human again. Shira, however, still chose to believe in her, because everyone at the guild knew Letfin's name and reputation. Though just a same-rank adventurer, he had always been respected. She promised that if Tsubasa ever needed anything in the guild, she'd help without hesitation. Moved by her attitude, Tsubasa brought her to Lulin's house for a more detailed conversation. Shira didn't waste time and went straight to the point. After learning that Tsubasa had become a monster but wouldn't harm others, Shira accepted it without fear, though it showed she had little sense of danger, especially since many rookie adventurers had recently gone missing. While monsters could be the cause, if that were true, they should have at least left behind some remains. The guild now believed the recent string of disappearances was caused by human intervention, which made sense. Tsubasa's suspicious appearance and surprisingly high strength, despite still holding a low adventurer rank, naturally made him a prime suspect, especially with rumors about him spreading everywhere, some even being deliberately exaggerated. Trying to stay away from trouble, Tsubasa decided to hide in a cave for a few days. How long exactly? His friend asked. About 3 days, Tsubasa replied, and with that they parted ways. During this time, Tsubasa was stunned to discover that after evolving into a corpse demon, he had somehow learned the art of magic energy fusion, a technique he had only vaguely heard of back when he was human, known to be incredibly dangerous because improper use could lead to one's body exploding. And yet, he also realized he could still use holy energy despite being undead now, even to the point where any wood he slashed would be revived with life, which amazed his friend, who exclaimed that such holy energy could only come from the gods. Apparently, it may have come from the time Tsubasa restored a long-abandoned shrine. Now, having 3 distinct energy types, mana, ki, and holy power, his friend suggested trying the advanced fusion technique, which combined all 3 to produce a powerful golden energy capable of drastically increasing attack power, but at extreme risk, since failure to control it would lead to internal combustion. Though his friend said it half-jokingly, Tsubasa took it seriously, thinking that as an undead, even if his body exploded, he might survive. He held out both hands, and red and blue energies swirled into a golden light, the prototype of magic energy fusion. Concentrating that power into his sword was agonizing, like forcibly merging conflicting energies, but he struck a piece of wood and carved it into a perfect sphere instantly, yet the iron sword shattered from the strain because ordinary weapons couldn't handle holy energy. So his friend gave him a specially made weapon, which couldn't handle holy energy either, but could at least channel ki and mana. At that moment, Tsubasa suddenly recalled the mysterious woman he'd met earlier and asked what to do if even fused energy couldn't defeat an enemy. His friend replied casually, "Then just bring more swords." Realizing he needed stronger weapons, Tsubasa decided to pick up a guild quest, but just then overheard a dispute coming from a nearby alley. Apparently, someone's private commission had fallen through. Seeing an opportunity, Tsubasa gave one of the men a small bribe to let him take over the quest, which the man readily agreed to since unofficial commissions were a hassle to deal with. The client, Renthis from Tuz village, explained that every year their village held strange rituals offering young women as sacrifices to the Lord of the Lake in hopes of saving the village, and now it was his sister's turn. The only goal was to save her, not slay the monster, but Tsubasa felt something was off. By the time they arrived, it was evening, and the village was eerily quiet. Once a lively place, it had turned cold and withdrawn since the Lord of the Lake began causing trouble, with households marking their doors, signaling who had been chosen to offer their daughter. Renthis explained that the marks weren't made by the lake deity itself, who supposedly lived deep in the waters and had never been seen, but rather by a creature called Huma that served her, a powerful monster, which made Tsubasa tense. Just then, Renthis' sister opened the door and immediately pulled him back inside, distrustful of Tsubasa and insisting the ritual couldn't be stopped just because one man didn't believe in it. But the request had been made by Renthis, and only he could cancel it, so reluctantly, the the sister agreed not to interfere, stating she was willing to be sacrificed voluntarily. This made Tsubasa certain that the so-called Lord of the Lake had to be taken down. The next day, he went to the lakeside to investigate, and a merchant told him that the so-called deity was furious lately, which explained why business was terrible and villagers were too scared to buy anything. The merchant advised him to leave town before the ritual began, but night fell quickly, and the girl had already begun preparing for the ceremony. Guided by the village elders chanting, she boarded a wooden boat, and as it reached the lake's center, a thick mist rolled in and the jewel in the offering jar began to glow. It seemed the Lord of the Lake had appeared, and soon a massive squid-like creature emerged from the water, which made Tsubasa instantly suspicious. Standing calmly on the water's surface using a special item from the merchant, he concluded this was an illusion. Krakens usually lived in oceans and didn't breathe fire, so this was all fake. As he passed through the squid's body, the illusion faded and revealed a cargo ship hidden in the mist, using magic projectors to cast fake images and fireballs, thus creating the illusion of a lake deity, completely staged. Whole cluster blooming brightly in the swamp's poisonous mist, glowing with a vibrant crimson hue. Tsubasa was amazed at how beautiful yet eerie the dragon blood flowers looked in person, and just as he was about to pick them, he remained cautious, knowing that places where such rare herbs grew often had guardian creatures nearby. But oddly, no danger emerged, and he smoothly collected the flowers, carefully wrapping them in protective cloth to avoid contaminating them. After completing the collection, he made his way out of the swamp with Little Black by his side, now more than just a pet but an unexpected and powerful companion. Tsubasa couldn't help but smile at the absurdity of it all, thinking how strange it was that he, an undead once on the verge of losing his mind to bloodlust, now had a loyal rat infused with holy power helping him on his missions. Meanwhile, back at the guild, word of the Two's village incident had reached the top ranks, and though the villagers never revealed who had saved them, suspicion naturally fell on anyone associated with Lulin, especially since she'd been close to the man now suspected of being the missing Letfen. Shira had come to question her, trying to get clarity on why someone like Tsubasa would risk getting involved in such a messy case, and while Lulin acted indifferent, her evasive answers only made Shira more curious. When asked if she knew why Tsubasa wanted to become a divine eagle rank adventurer, Lulin admitted she'd never asked. Among adventurers, it was considered polite not to pry into pasts, and honestly, Tsubasa had always been the kind of guy who didn't talk much about himself. Shira then asked if Lulin wasn't worried about Tsubasa getting hurt during this quest, considering the dangerous swamp and the terrifying Terrasque lurking within. But Lulin just smiled quietly, trusting that he would survive because he always did. Back in the swamp, Tsubasa's battle with the Terrasque had pushed him to the brink. Despite having resistance to poison, his magical and Kai-based attacks weren't strong enough to penetrate the beast's thick hide, and even when he tried his magic key fusion technique, the results were disappointing. Just when he had no idea what to do next, Little Black suddenly leapt into action, crawling straight into the monster's mouth using holy energy. Tsubasa feared the worst, but moments later the rat was spat back out, unharmed, and with that strange reaction, he realized the Terrasque was afraid of holy power. Remembering his earlier training in holy energy fusion, he channeled all three of his powers, magic, ki, and sacred force, into a final strike that finally brought the beast down. After collecting the massive corpse into his storage, he and Little Black advanced further into the heart of the swamp and soon found the legendary dragon blood flower field, except it wasn't just one or two flowers, but an entire blooming patch waiting quietly in the mist. Bloodthirsty mask couldn't be removed once worn. The girl's eyes lit up with curiosity, asking if she could take a closer look. Though Tsubasa hesitated at first, he finally agreed, and as she gently examined the mask, she marveled at its design, noting that it seemed far older and rarer than even the most ancient magical tools in her family's collection. She explained that items like this, which had both will and power, were usually considered cursed relics, and their existence was extremely rare, only passed down through dark history or discovered in forbidden ruins. Tsubasa realized he might be in possession of something far beyond his current understanding, and the girl, amused, asked why someone so clearly from a humble background would possess such a treasure. Tsubasa deflected her question with a smile, pretending it was just luck, but deep inside he grew more cautious. After all, he still didn't know the true purpose of the labyrinth-like mansion, nor why the Latolga family had taken an interest in him specifically. As the tea ceremony continued, the girl casually mentioned that those who fail the garden maze test are usually memory wiped and sent away, which instantly made Tsubasa alert. She laughed softly at his reaction, saying it was only a joke, but her eyes held no trace of humor. Before she left, she gave him a small charm that would allow him to pass the next few trials, though she warned him the further he progressed, the more the maze would react to his presence, and that the final trial would involve not just strength but also desire. With the charm in hand, Tsubasa continued into the depths of the garden labyrinth, feeling the magical terrain shift beneath his feet. Pathways that were there a moment ago disappeared, and new doors opened into strange floating courtyards. He relied on his sharpened senses and holy energy to avoid traps, until he finally reached a room where a glowing crystal hovered in midair. Touching Reaching it caused a wave of visions, memories of vampires, ghouls, blood rituals, and a throne of bone. The crystal shattered, and from the shadows stepped a familiar figure. White hair, cold eyes, the mysterious man he had once encountered at the swamp. The man greeted Tsubasa as if they'd known each other for years and claimed that his evolution had been carefully orchestrated, that the blood Tsubasa drank, the mask he wore, the trials he faced, all had been prepared by someone watching from the shadows. Shocked, Tsubasa demanded to know why, but the man only smiled and said, "You'll understand when the seal breaks." Then everything turned black. When Tsubasa awoke, he was at the mansion gates, his body unharmed, but the charm gone, and the mask slightly different, now bearing a strange red mark etched over the left side. He quickly returned to the guild to find Lulin and Shira waiting anxiously. As he explained everything, Lulin looked worried but intrigued, confirming that the Latolga family indeed had access to forbidden magic and ancient relics. They warned him to stay away, but Tsubasa knew this was only the beginning. He had crossed into a hidden world of magical politics and bloodline secrets.